and if you don't give it to us, then then you're the bad guys and the bad actors. And this is not a wish. This is not we would like to. This is
Yes.
we deserve this. We gave you all of these weapons, which, by the way, is just like feeding the military industrial complex and the economy of the United States, right? They fed their own economy and now are demanding even more, being fed even
Yes.
more, and being applauded for that. Isn't it this?
Completely.
And the
Completely.
Europeans are not saying
Completely.
anything, nothing.
No, no.
They support this.
No, this reminds me. This reminds me. Last June, I was in Shanghai
Mm,
for the Association of Friendship Societies, and I met a former U.S. senator. Now I want to say this because it ties with what we were saying before. Um, he was a very famous Californian senator. His wife was still an ambassador at the time of Biden. He told me, "Do you know that before I came here, I was visited by FBI to tell me, why are you going to Shanghai? There's no need to go to Shanghai." I said, as if I'm coming to Shanghai to betray my country. You know what we were talking before about diplomatic relations and human relations. He said, when are we going to learn that the world is not a Western cowboy film where we go and shoot at everyone and then not realize how many we've killed and how much blood we've shed? He said, we have gone crazy. He said, this is not the way. And he was a very close friend of Jimmy Carter, who I can tell you was a person who did respect even our sovereignty. I remember when he visited Malta, obviously he was not a president anymore, and we had a private dinner together, even with the prime minister at the time. Carter was very respectful of our neutrality, and he could understand why a small country like us, to safeguard our interests, we need to be friends with everyone because basically our neutrality is about to try and be friends with as many different countries as possible because we are one of the most exposed countries in the world. In our case, globalization is not an ideological choice. We import practically everything and we export practically everything. So we need to have open borders. So when you have a bully who tells you you're either with me or against me, if you speak to others without my permission, I will hurt you. I mean, this is
but
it's,
this is
I mean, in our history, Pascal, we've been invaded 42 times, 42 times, always for geopolitical reasons, not because we did something naughty, you know. It's because either they wanted us or they wanted to deprive others of us. So when we finally 60 years ago said, not only we are independent, we want to be independent and then move on, not to be a military base anymore, and then to move on and say we want to be a neutral and non-aligned country, with not to threaten anyone else, but for our own sake, because we are so small that if you have the harbor used for warships, it means that you cannot bring in the cruise passenger liners because that would be a problem. So if we want to develop an economy that gives jobs and that gives prosperity to our country, neutrality is a must. So in our case, it's also a necessity, not just because we want peace and social progress, which we obviously want, but then to imagine, I repeat, to have the last document of the Biden-Blinken administration saying, goal number one of our mission in Malta is to align Malta to Western interests is incredible. I mean, imagine if our embassy in Washington had to have such a document and said, number one is to make sure that we push forward Russian and Chinese interests in Washington to undermine American interests. I mean,
no.
it would be unbelievable.
That's why the one thing realists need to we realize that the world is unequal. It's horribly unequal. This all of the liberal talk about
Completely.
everybody has the same say and everybody gets to choose their own alliances. It's obviously wrong. It's obviously window dressing. It's obviously a charade, a masquerade. Um, so the question is, why do some states not understand that? Or let's say, why do some political processes, like in Ukraine, then dismantle neutrality? Ukraine had neutrality in its constitution as well, for very good reasons, very self-evident, especially for the people in the 90s. And then the political process there dismantled it. And when the choice came, push came to shove, Europeans, EU, like Europe or Russia, they actually then picked the side, also because of the coup and so on, right? But in Malta, Malta succeeded in maintaining that position, maybe also because it was out of the focus, right? There was no NGOs and no undermining, although Alexander Dragona says there were NGOs and so on. So,
Of course, of course. Yes, 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 yes. And I remember even in the 80s, even the 80s, so-called public diplomacy, having foundations, even German foundations and American foundations, organizing initiatives in Malta to undermine our neutrality. Yes, I mean, it was there. It was
so
there.
how did Malta
Um,
manage not to fall for that, or how did your political process? How did you manage to maintain your position?
well, I think the quality of leadership is important. I think in the case of small states, the quality of leadership is very important. What helped us also was the fact that strategically we had lost our importance compared to before because of transport, because of missile technology. Ships do not need and planes do not need to stop in Malta because 30 minutes away in Sicily, you have NATO bases there. So in our case, they did not need us anymore. And I think it's good to turn that into an advantage. But the new agenda, I repeat, the new agenda from the Blinken team was turn Malta again into a NATO outpost. So I am very worried that in the last 2 years, we have started undermining our neutrality because now we are associate members in the Parliamentary Assembly of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. We have had delegations of NATO visiting our armed forces headquarters to have interoperability. And
Oh,
you know
God.
what those nice technical words are interoperability. I do not believe that they need us as a base, but yes, as a logistic base, yes. Because if you were to see the size of the American embassy in Malta and the size of the Russian embassy in Malta and the size of the Chinese embassy in Malta, it's out of all proportion to what they need to have in a small country like Malta.
Oh,
It
really?
is obvious that those are important in terms of what happens in Africa. And I know what I'm saying. Things that go on in some North African countries, from the central stations of the CIA and MI6, need Malta logistically. Okay, I know what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying of ministers going to visit Tripoli or to visit Tunis, but they come and sleep in Malta and they have their meetings in Malta. So from that point of view,